So, after all the news and the rumors of Ben Roethlisberger probably having his last season this year in a Pittsburgh Steelers uniform, and with a game last night in which he, didn't have an incredibly terrible statistical game, but still lost pretty handedly to a Minnesota Vikings team that isn't incredible, it's time to start wondering who the next quarterback is going to be for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And obviously, there's been some names thrown out that you probably know of, but let's go ahead and go. In my opinion, the best way to do this is to go one by one every single quarterback who has either made a start this year who has been the majority starter for their team so far this season. So as it seems at the moment, it looks like a possible trade market for Ben Simmons is starting to heat up. We've obviously heard teams, even back before this year, we were hearing about teams like Houston possibly trading someone like James Harden to Philly for Ben Simmons. We've been hearing things like Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum going to Philadelphia. It seems like a lot of teams are in on this Ben Simmons sweepstakes. However, the one team that I have not heard of is a team that I'm sure you haven't heard of, a team I'm sure not a lot of people have even thought of in terms of a good trade target for Ben Simmons, is a team who possibly has one of the best teams and best situations that would fit around Ben Simmons in the entire NBA. You're talking about a team that has a good coach. You're talking about a team who has a good historic culture. You're talking about a team who just, in terms of their franchise history, especially in the last 10 to 15 seasons, even before then, I guess even really in the past 25 years, this team has been NBA royalty. This team has been NBA. They've been the standard. Even if they haven't won a championship in a few years, even if they haven't been the most competitive team in the NBA in the last few seasons. A lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of their legends, their team legends, have left over the past 5 to 10 seasons. And even with that, they still are respected as one of the major franchises in the current and in NBA history. Sorry, Orlando Magic, I'm not talking about your team. I am talking about the San Antonio Spurs. Now, the Spurs, everything that I've said about the Spurs is true. They have an elite coach in Greg Popovich. They have a franchise history of being respected in the NBA. Not only right now are they respected as one of the best franchises in the NBA, they are respected in NBA history as an elite franchise, going back to the days when they had David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, guys even before then like George Gervin. You're talking about a team who in NBA history is one of, when you could compare them to someone like a Duke University of college basketball or elite names in the NBA. You don't have an elite team conversation without bringing up the San Antonio Spurs. Now, even though the team has fallen on some hard times over the last year, I'd say about the last 2 or 3 seasons, they still do have some players on their team in which could facilitate and be considered a good trade for someone like Ben Simmons. And if I am the Philadelphia 76ers, at this point, getting anything I can for someone in Ben Simmons who is obviously not going to play for the team, is obviously looking to get out of the situation. The San Antonio Spurs have a few of probably the best options available to trade Ben Simmons for. Now let's go ahead and talk about the number one asset that the San Antonio Spurs have on their roster in terms of trying to facilitate a trade for Ben Simmons. You're talking about someone in DeJounte Murray, a guy who right now is at 25 years old. He's a guy who, even though he hasn't blossomed into the all-star point guard that I think a lot of people thought he would be at this point in his career, he still is a starting point guard who is better than a lot of the other starting point guards in the NBA. I think if you were to compare him to anybody in either history or at the moment, he would be like a better version of Reggie Jackson when he was with the Detroit Pistons. He's not going to take as many shots as Reggie Jackson, but he's going to be a better defender than Reggie was in Detroit. He's going to be just a more efficient player than Reggie was. Now, some of that is not fair for Reggie Jackson because he was kind of shouldered with the task of carrying the Detroit Pistons. But with that same token, DeJounte Murray has kind of been tasked with carrying the San Antonio Spurs franchise after Tony Parker, after Tim Duncan, after Manu Ginobili all left, either around the time that DeJounte was in the league in 2016 or short after when Tim Duncan, Ginobili, and Duncan or Parker all left the franchise. And to his credit, he's been a decent player in the NBA. You're talking about a guy in 2020 who, started about 67 games, wasn't the best player in the world, wasn't an all-star caliber player, but still was just one of those average kind of players who puts up about 13, 14 points a game, is able to take the opposing point guard and try to limit him as much as possible. He's not going to turn the ball over an incredible amount a game, a little over 1 turnover per game last year as the starting point guard for the Spurs. About 5 assists, about 6 rebounds, and just is like, he's pretty much like a Lonzo Ball. If you consider what Lonzo Ball does for the Chicago Bulls, he's going to be the 4th option on a really good team. And right now, when you're considering what DeJounte Murray does, he's the best player by far on the San Antonio Spurs roster. And not only is he the most talented player, when you look at what his contract states over the next few years, that's really what makes him the number 1 asset for this franchise. It's very rare that you get someone like DeJounte Murray, who, even though he did tear his ACL at the age of 22 and missed the entire 2018-2019 season, you're talking about a guy who came back really strong, has had career seasons even after his ACL tear. You're talking about a guy who is still, I think, considered to have a lot of potential at the age of only 25 years old. This is a guy coming in from the Washington Huskies at the number 30 overall pick, who has just been, I guess the 29th pick, sorry. He has just been I think he's been the guy in San Antonio that they kind of not exactly wished he could have been, but they're happy with what he has blossomed into. And when you have someone as good as DeJounte Murray, it's very rare that you get him at the age that he's at for only $15 million a year. And he still has 3 years left on his contract. And what's really, really intriguing, at least in my opinion, for the Philadelphia 76ers, is not only would they be able to get DeJounte Murray for a few years, the only way that they lose this situation is if they have to give up a boatload of draft picks, which, yeah, they probably will in order to get DeJounte Murray from the Spurs, because at the end of the day, the Spurs are going to have to give up Thad Young and probably Jakob Poeltl in order to make this trade happen. I don't see any of the other guys in San Antonio going to Philly. Maybe Philly gives up someone like a Tyrese Maxey. Maybe Philly gives up someone like someone that's just not a major player for the team. Maybe someone like a Shake Milton. But other than that, they're going to have to give up a lot of draft picks, because $15 million a year, like I just said, for a 25-year-old kid who still could blossom into an elite player is kind of a steal if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. Now let's talk about what the San Antonio Spurs would be getting. The Spurs, if they were to do this right, could get a guy in Ben Simmons who maybe he doesn't come back until, let's just say he doesn't come back till the All-Star break. At this point, the San Antonio Spurs are 9-15. They're looking like they're going to have a top 5, top 10 draft pick. And there is a chance that they could pair someone like Ben Simmons with an elite scorer, possibly someone like Apollo Banchero if their record gets as low as it could. There's other guys like Chet Holmgren that they could get. There's other guys in NCAA and in the G League right now who are putting up good numbers, who could fit alongside Ben Simmons a lot better than what he is currently tasked with fitting with right now in Philly. And if you're the San Antonio Spurs, I think it's time to start recognizing that they are at the end of the road with this Greg Popovich era. I am honestly surprised that Greg Popovich is still coaching and still doing as well as he has in his career as he is right now. I think it's really an accomplishment that the San Antonio Spurs team is still treading water, and they've treaded water for the past couple of years since all their legends left. They kind of got fleeced in a couple of their deals in terms of trading Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan. I love DeMar DeRozan, but that's a franchise-altering trade when you trade someone like Kawhi Leonard. They just haven't had the best of luck in the past few years with some of the deals they've made, with some of the draft picks they made. I do like guys like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson and some of these other guys that they've drafted, but they're not really panning out to be elite players at this point in their careers. They've done some good things, but they're not elite. You get someone like Ben Simmons in that rotation, you now have an elite player who could probably lead a franchise at least to the playoffs. And yes, I get it. Ben Simmons doesn't shoot the ball, and I understand that Greg Popovich would probably hate that. He'd probably try to train Ben Simmons to shoot the ball from three. But I feel like Greg Popovich is one of the few coaches in the NBA who could play someone who could have a star player who doesn't shoot threes. Um, I mean, you're talking about a guy in Ben Simmons who can do a lot of things on the court, defensively and offensively. So, in my eyes, this is perfect for both San Antonio and Philly. At this point, Philadelphia and San Antonio are two franchises who are kind of on different ends of their spectrum. Philly, with Joel Embiid, is supposed to be going into this window where they are competing for championships, and right now they are not doing that. They are about a 500 team in the Eastern Conference, even though the Eastern Conference has gotten kind of loaded this year with talent and teams who are playing really well. Being a middle of the road team in the Eastern Conference is not an accomplishment by any standard. So trying to get someone like a DeJounte Murray who could come in and fill that point guard spot effectively and efficiently not only helps out Joel Embiid, it helps out their entire organization. And it's addition by subtraction for the San Antonio Spurs because they do have good players on their team like DeJounte Murray, like Jakob Poeltl, like some other guys on the team, but just being okay enough to be a 9-15 team who maybe could look at a 10 spot to win a play-in game is not really a situation I think Greg Popovich wants to be in. I don't think the San Antonio Spurs want to be in that situation. And right now, trading for Ben Simmons is probably the best thing that they could do in order to get their franchise back on track to possibly be winning championships near in the future.